What's the thing that keeps us from showing empathy?
Mm,
What's in the way there? And it's a lot of times it's some fear that we have that, oh no, they're upset and I have to fix it. It's a fear of not something, not
yeah.
living up, not being worthy, not loving well, not being loved, all these fear that, because really, if we weren't afraid, we'd just be fine. We'd just show up and be like listening. And yeah, that's tough for you. But there's some piece of us that tries to own somebody else's pain in a really unhealthy way and wants it to go away. So we're like, we do that positive arguing thing where we're like, well, it's just not that bad. You still have one arm, or whatever it is.
Welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. I'm Shai and I'm here with Nina. Our mission is to help you, Christian married man or woman, navigate conflict and build a connection so you can have a thriving marriage. Today, we are discussing what to say when you need someone to hold space for you. Now, we know empathy and vulnerability are two emotions that the culture has been embracing over the last 10 to 15 years. We're now seeing this, whereas before it was viewed sort of as a weakness, as a strength, even in the most cutthroat, brutal spaces like corporate America and politics. It is now widely embraced that to have empathy as a leader is actually a skill. Nina, what are your thoughts around this whole empathy conversation and how it shows up in our communication?
I love this topic. It is amazing. And you're right, it is becoming a thing. Oxford actually added a definition, number 4, and defined validation differently. Whereas validation used to just be, here's the truth, and it has to be, somebody else has to say that's true to be true. But the number 4 is really all about how it's that person's truth, which is what empathy is. You are empathizing with somebody else's version of reality. And it doesn't mean that you agree with them, but it's a necessary part of any kind of relationship where you want to have connection. Because without empathy, without understanding, we don't have connection. And God does this for us, to us. And we're to do that with each other. And when we don't feel heard, we don't feel seen. The other person feels, those things. And then at the same time, we're actually missing out on what God's best could be because we're missing connection in those spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's some discussion also around left brain and right brain and how some of us are easily empathetic versus others who are maybe more logical in their thinking. Is this something that we can work on and build within ourselves, despite how we've been wired, in your opinion?
Yeah, it is a learnable skill. I will agree. It is also like you think of the spiritual gift of mercy. Like some people are just loaded with that, right? And compassion, but we're all called to love. We're all called to have the compassion of Christ. I mean, if we have the indwelling King of the universe, Holy Spirit, that there's more than just awareness of facts and the word itself. And it was so funny today, right before we started podcasting, and I'd forgotten the topic. I was, me, but I got this. I was reading a prayer request from a friend of mine, and at the bottom it says Proverbs 2:6. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. And yeah, I know, it's so good. Understanding is, I understand where you're coming from. I can empathize with your situation. Even if I haven't had your exact situation, everybody on the planet knows what it means to feel alone. Everyone knows what it feels like to be dismissed or disregarded, disrespected. Like those feelings that people have, we can empathize with that, even if we're not in those situation exactly with them, even if we respond differently. To be able to see that is I mean, you're a human relations ninja. You are great with people. If you can see somebody else's reality and have understanding, compassion of Christ and empathy for them in that. And we call that in Greater Impact, we call that actually validating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your community, it's, bunch of stuff activity wise, skill set wise, wrapped up in that. But you're basically communicating to somebody that what you're saying is real and I see you and it's okay. It matters.
Absolutely, it matters. Well, today, what we want our listeners to walk away with is the what to say, as always. Sometimes it's difficult if you're not wired, if you don't have the gift of mercy or compassion, and you have to work on that skill. Sometimes it's really difficult to get that out of some people. And maybe if it's you, give it to others. And so we want to discuss what can we do? What are some things we can say in those difficult conversations to stir up that empathy? But before we do that, I just want to remind our listeners that we have a website, greaterimpact.org, where you can download a free PDF, How to Stop Walking on Eggshells, and it'll give you some more tips around how to navigate conflict. So check us out in your free time. Okay, so if you don't do this well, you can end up spewing emotion that isn't contained properly, and you can end up in the wrong direction and have an even bigger mess than you started with. So I was just a quick story. I was in the car yesterday with my girls. I was doing the pickup evening commute, and it had been a long day. I had several meetings scheduled. And so actually I had to do an early drop off and then a late pickup. And so it kind of threw everybody off of the routine. So I immediately noticed some irritability and kind of had to say something. Well, the irritability kind of continued. And then I said something else. And then I ended up pulling over is what happened. Ooh. Which then made me irritable because, at this point, I'm ready to get home. It's been a long day. But the Holy Spirit just alerted me to the need of the moment, even in my irritability, that there was tiredness, there was exhaustion, and there needed to be affection in that moment. And so I was able to pull over and cuddle with the littlest one, who is still learning to use her words and doesn't know what she needs always. Yeah. And so, I was able to ask her if she was tired. I was able to ask her if she had had a long day, and I got the nodding, like, yes, mommy. And so after 5 minutes, we were able to, resume our commute home, and everyone was pretty peaceful after that. And I just thought about that, and I said, how often is it that we miss that, because everybody's tired and no one really knows what is needed. So it's a skill. I agree with you that you have to know and be aware of what is needed in those moments. And oftentimes you need to ask too. I've learned that sometimes we have to vocalize, hey, I need a hug, or I need empathy, or I need a listening ear, in our conversations. And I know with wives, especially when we're talking to our husbands, it's like, we just want that and nothing else, I know you talk to wives a lot. Do you run into that issue where we just want validation and not an actual solution to the problem? Do you ever run into that issue with wives that you coach and counsel?
Oh, I think it's like most of the time, and it's not just the women. Oh man, few things feel as disrespectful to a husband as a wife saying, well, you should just, or you could only, how come you didn't, around a thing they're telling them about that happened to them at work or whatever. It's like, no, I don't want your advice. I don't want you to fix my problem. I just want you to be on my side, and it doesn't matter which gender it is. It's this person is communicating, here's this thing, just like your daughter, and what they're looking for. And this is wisdom, is knowing that what's being said is not always what's actually an attempt at communication or being attempted to be communicated. There's usually something underneath there when there's emotion around it. And by the way, awesome mothering by paying attention and giving the loves and the hugs and all of the asking the questions. I mean, that's legit. I was in a car as a high school student with one of my dad's former business partners. They were driving me across the state. They had their whole family in the car. It's like this station wagon. There were 3 rows of seats. And I was in the back row, and in front of me were his 2 kids that were probably, I don't know, 7 and 9 or something. And they were fussing with each other. We were 10 minutes outside town. He stopped the car. He opened up the doors on both sides, dragged both the kids out and left them on the highway, drove away.
Oh no.
Yeah. And I'm just sitting in the back going, what just happened here? He tried to get them to stop bickering with each other. They wouldn't. So that was his solution. And I'm just sitting there going, wow. And then he stops, and I'm watching him turn a watch, and he goes back there and he's yelling at them, and he marches them back up to the car, and they each sat in their chairs. They didn't say anything for like 4 hours. It was total silence. They were just crying, a little bit of crying and nobody moving. And I'm just, you had a completely grown up response there. Beautiful parenting.
Well, wow. I wish I could take credit. That was the Holy Spirit. Because by that moment, I was bickering at the same time. So it was the Holy Spirit that said, okay, just take a minute,
Yeah. Well, you yielded to it though. And that's so much the case, right? Because if we're, what's the thing that keeps us from showing empathy? What's in the way there? And it's a lot of times it's some fear that we have that, oh no, they're upset and I have to fix it. It's a fear of not something, not living up, not being worthy, not loving well, not being loved, all these fear that, because really, if we weren't afraid, we'd just be fine. We'd just show up and be like listening. And yeah, that's tough for you. But there's some piece of us that tries to own somebody else's pain in a really unhealthy way and wants it to go away. So we do that positive arguing thing where we're like, well, it's just not that bad. You still have one arm, or whatever it is.
Wow. Now that's pretty profound, because that ultimately directs us back to the question we always ask here: what's going on in me that's causing me to show up in a way that isn't in line with Christ-like identity? And that's rich. Yeah. Go ahead.
When you had mentioned that it's hard to get that from somebody, and so there's a couple of pieces around that matter. When we have an awareness that we need that from someone, and it's normal to want to talk about your big, bad, ugly, very bad day with the person that you're close to. You want to take that energy and have someone help you dispense it, right? And so we'll go with them and they'll be like, you won't believe what Joe did at work today because blah, 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 and then they did this. And your person is just looking at you like, wow, you're really upset. And they don't know what to do with that. And so one of the best what to say is we can do here is we can say to the person, hey, I had a terrible day. I really want to tell you everything that happened. And I just need you to agree with me that everyone is horrible. I'm going to say some things that are just crazy. And maybe even just, you might want to call the cops over it, but don't. I'm going to come back. I'm going to lose my mind for a moment. Will you join me in that? Like, for real. Men love that, especially because they're like, oh, I don't have to fix it. Like, no, you don't have to do anything. Just listen to me and agree everybody's terrible. Okay, fine. And that sounds really awful to say, but it's useful. Like, I need to know. I like to know. I like to have the expectations set. My daughter, she's brilliant at this stuff with me. She'll say, okay, I'm going to tell you about a thing and it's already solved. It's already fixed, but I want you to know what happened. Because otherwise I start asking her questions. Well, what happened then? And did you talk to Dada? And she's like, well, can you let me finish my story? Okay. She wants me to hear her whole story. Okay. And then I'll ask her the question, what do you need from me here? What does love look like? Because otherwise,
yeah.
yeah.
The emotional intelligence that you both have in that situation is amazing, because you're asking the questions that need to be asked to get to the response that is needed. And most of us don't know how to do that.
Well, it's so simple though. And I used to think like there was something special about me. I really did. But honestly, it's just paying attention to the inside of you, the voice that's in you, the Holy Spirit, or the question that you have that's authentic, that is, gosh, because you have in the situation, I think I do this best with my daughter, because she's a genius when it comes to interacting with people communicatively. She's really good at that. She used to be a co-director for a theater production here. She'd work with little kids, and that's like herding cats, 4-year-olds having meltdowns over dance steps, and so and so has a prettier costume. I'm like, oh my word. But so she can handle those guys. But the thing with her is like, I value the relationship, so my heart's in the right place going in most of the time. And then on top of that, I have a desire to give her what she needs in that moment. And that's different than appeasing or people pleasing, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I want is to be of use to her in the conversation. And I don't make the assumption that I know everything. And that's a problem that we all get into, especially with kids. And we're not wrong half the time with kids, but with adults, which you're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, you got to start treating them like that, right? You got to not make that assumption.
Yeah.
And if you're with your spouse, especially, you got to, if you listen to the voice that says, hey, I don't know what they really need here, and I don't really know what they should do. Well, that's legit. So what do you do with that? Mm-hmm. Well, what do you need? That's the question.
Yeah,
it's being asked already inside of you, right? You don't have to come up with something cool. Just ask. They'll tell you. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's just interesting because we don't think to say that. Like, we skip over that, and mm-hmm. We just go right into solution mode. And so it takes awareness, both on the person speaking and listening, to say, okay, what needs to happen right now? Like, help me get out of right or whatever left brain or mm-hmm. Fix it mode, and really just be present in the moment. So
well, you did that with your daughter. You were like, do you need a hug? She's like, yeah. And so you gave her what she knew what she needed. Sometimes they don't, but you helped her know, and it was right. So good job.
Yeah. I mean, it's the work of the Holy Spirit, like I said, but I do think that with adults, it's more challenging because, you're dealing with bigger problems.
Yeah.
And we're a little bit more stuck in our ways. But anyway, it is something you can learn to do. And that's the message we want our listeners to have. Now, the thing I want to also point out is that empathy is something that you can't make somebody give you. This is something that they have to choose to do on their own. Some people really need to work on it. They don't know how, and we can help them, mm-hmm. but it is a decision that, they have to sort of make on their own. I was watching a show recently on toxic forgiveness, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this term before. It was a brand new term for me.
Yeah, I've never heard those two together. It sounds like something like a cesspool of nuclear waste of some sort. I don't know, relationally. Wow, what is it?
Yeah, so it's this concept where you sort of rush to the forgiveness step before you've actually had a chance to grieve or be angry or, whatever you go through whenever you have this thing. that requires forgiveness. And, as Christians, we know we're supposed to forgive. And so there's often the pressure there, whether we put it on ourselves or we put it on others to get to that place. Well, if you've ever been hurt and you need to forgive, that forgiveness doesn't happen overnight, and there needs to be, time. Mm-hmm. And so the toxic part is when you rush it, okay, before you're ready. And I was just thinking about how, empathy plays into that, where we may have been the one that has dished the offense, and we want the forgiveness, but really what needs to happen is we need to have empathy for that person in that moment, and allow them to process whatever it is that they're feeling, and give time and space for that. And so I was thinking, man, that's so legit, because forgiveness, truly, if you're the one forgiving, it's hard sometimes, and you're not ready.
It can be. I used to struggle with this, right? And watch God give me something now as a challenge, because I'm going to say that I don't anymore. And that is, I think the reason I used to struggle was I didn't have and I don't pretend to understand this fully now. Wow, I'm interrupting myself. This is great. But I didn't have the understanding that I have now, which isn't the full understanding, but it is a greater understanding of what he did for me. And so it's really easy for me to forgive just about anything, like no joke. I don't struggle with forgiving people. I also have a ton of security that comes from knowing that just because I forgave you, and I really do, I let go of that. It's like, that's between you and God, that thing you did. And I also now don't trust you, which is an outcome that's normal. And as a result of that, there's now boundaries. There's consequences to your behavior, and I'm going to navigate and figure out for myself what's smart in this space. And I give myself full reign to do that. And I think that's different than being unforgiving. Unforgiving is I'm wandering around with resentment and anger, and this thing you did, I think about it all the time. It's eating my soul. I see you and I'm angry. It's ugly. It's green. It's a disgusting slime on the inside of my soul, and I hate it. When I look at, somebody doing something that wrongs me, yeah, absolutely. I process my feelings around that with God or somebody smarter than me when I can't hear him in that space, because that happens, right? And then I'm like, okay, I am forgiven. I'm going to choose to cancel your debt to me. You owe me nothing. I release you from that. And our relationship is now different. So what does that look like? And I'm confident in that space. So I agree with this toxic forgiveness thing, but I also am like, boy, that sounds like a victim's answer. I'm sorry. Oof. But, because that's labeling the other person is, you need to spend a bunch of time doing all this stuff because what they did was so bad, and you're going to weaken yourself if you forgive too early. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. If I have the power of Jesus Christ within me, if I have the power of the Holy Spirit within me, it costs me nothing to forgive you. I am setting boundaries that are normal, natural, healthy consequences that protect the relationship, and they're designed to rebuild trust. And you will either play with me in that space or you won't. And if you don't, that's not my problem. And I'm not angry at you about it. I'm sad over the loss of the relationship, but it is foolish to translate forgiveness into everything's fine. That's toxic. Absolutely. But that's a lack of boundaries. So, humans, we like to argue semantics. So I guess I'd argue on that.
Yeah. I was like, where do you draw the line here?
I know, right.
But I think, to your point, it's probably a maturity issue. I think probably the line would be where it is for you. If like you said, you really understand what Christ did for you, then it's like, yeah, okay, done. But here, here's how things are going to be going forward. Whereas maybe a less mature person would say, well, I I'm not forgiving, or I can't forgive, or I, whatever their, like you said, victim excuse might be. But either way, I do think that empathy applies on both sides of this there, because when a person is, enforcing boundaries, there still needs to be empathy for where they are. That is where they are in the relationship. And to force it to be something else is also, toxic. So,
well, and for people that don't know, and this, you're absolutely right. There's this, the need for empathy is, and understanding it, and compassion is more verbalized now than it's ever been. Right.
Right.
And studies are showing we're showing up less empathetic, less compassionate than we've ever been.
Wow.
Yeah. And I can't remember which college it was, but they surveyed students, and then they surveyed them again 20 years later, and there was like a 40% drop in compassion. And yeah, I know, right? Yeah, we have people called Karens in our world now, right? Like, I want to talk to the manager. Like, wow, that didn't used to be a thing.
Right.
And it isn't. We're called to love, and we're called to be, knowledge and understanding, that proverb. And so what does that look like? Well, if you go, well, I'm not a very empathetic person, I just call it like it is, what you're basically saying is, well, okay, like it is, that's your judgment of that situation. And so you've decided you're king, and there's some pride there, potentially, just saying, might want to look at that. The other piece of it is maybe you just don't know how,
Right.
maybe it's a thing of, and it's pretty simple to fake empathy until you start feeling it, because I think that emotional empathy, where we have a compassionate heart towards someone, I think that's the Holy Spirit. That love, that's a piece of loving someone, is you can see their thing and have compassion for that, just like God did. God was like, oh, Jesus, hey, you ready to go down there? Because they clearly don't get this. Can we love them so much that we'll send you, and so we did. But for those of us that have struggled with empathy, and I've got a couple of really close people in my life who've told me, I'm working on being empathetic. What do I do? Yeah. How do well, there's some things you can do. You can be really grateful. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's a phrase that's like level one of the ladder, step one, the first rung is be grateful and communicate that. And well, how do you know when to be grateful? Well, somebody did a thing for you, whether they had to do it or not, they did a thing. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. They hand you a receipt in a store. They give you your bags in your grocery cart. They, wave you by, when you're trying to park your car, whatever it is. Thank you so much. That's legit. That's a beginning step for empathy, is gratitude. And then as you move up the ladder, it's a skill thing. And this might feel a little awkward, but you repeat back to the person the last couple of words that they said. So you were talking about, the thing with your girls. And so at the end of a piece of that, I could have just simply said, you gave a hug, and just left that. And you would have talked more about that. That would have felt like connection to you, because I'm giving you back what you've already given me. That playback is, rephrasing people's words, a level up from that. So you've got the gratitude thing, you've got the rephrase thing, and then a level up from that would be an observation that is a little bit deeper, words that aren't said, and labeling an emotion you think they might be feeling, and you don't assume you're right. You don't say, you are feeling frustrated. You say, it seems like you're frustrated with this. Is that right? You're open to being wrong. And it opens the door for them to go, I don't think it's frustrated. I think I'm disappointed. And then, ooh, disappointed. Tell me more about that. Being willing to go into that next space.
Yeah.
You make an observation and then you ask a question around it. That's empathy. That's all of that validates a human being's experience. And that's the current Oxford version of that, right? Number 4, because it still means, I'm a graduate, right? Like, in master's degree, we did studies that were reliable and valid, meaning the thing measured what it was supposed to measure. The results were true. Yeah, I get that. 1 + 1 = 2. That's a valid math equation. A little bit different when you get into emotions and relationships. In the relationship math, is this person having an experience? Yes, they are. Is that true for them right now? Absolutely. That's the lens they see things through. Can you acknowledge the reality that they have? That's where the gold is, the frosting is, the supercharged ninja style human relation skill. It's like Jesus with Martha. When Martha's there and Mary's not making sandwiches or whatever they were trying to do. She's with the men sitting around Jesus's feet, listening to the teaching. Martha's losing her ever-loving mind because there's stuff to do. There's lots of people there, come on. And she goes and she complains to Christ that, Mary's not helping me, basically. This is super loosely translated. And Jesus says to her, he's like, oh, Martha, you are very anxious and concerned about many things. And it's not patronizing. He's just validating her experience. He's like, girl, you got a lot going on here. Yeah, you're worried. No kidding. And then he validates Mary. He's like, Mary's chosen the better thing. It's all good, So he's a master at it. He could do it in a sentence and a look from his eyes. I think it just melt anybody, right? Like, can't you just get excited about seeing that someday? Yeah. But anyway, hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. I have so many notes here that I have taken from this conversation. And the one thing I want to say about empathy or validation, whatever term you use, is it really is sometimes the very thing that can build a connection from what seems to be so difficult, because the underlying need is we all want to be seen. We all want to be known. And even if you don't naturally have it, if it's not a gift that you have, or, something you have to work at, there are so many things you can do. One of the things we said was say it out loud. Just say in the middle of the conversation, I need your validation. I need your empathy. Would you join me in this emotion? And invite that person along on the journey with you. And that actually will relieve them oftentimes of just trying to solve it, and they can relax in that moment with you. Another thing you can do is pay attention to what you're feeling in that moment while that person is sharing their experience. What do you feel? And then say that out loud. And if it's difficult for you, then try being grateful. Gratitude is, like we said, the first step to moving toward an empathetic conversation. You can repeat words at the end of someone's statement, inviting them to share more, be curious about it, and then acknowledge what their reality is also another way to build empathy. And if you just start there, you're going to start moving toward a much healthier conversation and maybe even solve the problem, if that is a desire as well. So thank you so much, Nina, for these tips. This is, very, very helpful for those of us that are working on our empathy and validation. So if you enjoyed this episode, check out the next one. We think that you'll glean even more good stuff. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and we welcome you back again. Thanks for joining.